When you think of the Atari 2600, what kind of games come to mind? River Raid, Centipede, Missile Command, Yars' Revenge? Arcade-style games that are easy for anybody to just pick up and play. I mean, the controller only has one button and one joystick. There's not a whole lot to work with. But that didn't stop developers from trying to make something more complicated, something more adventurous, something daring. And I thought it would be a good idea to look at some of the games that try to do something a little bit more than just an arcade-style experience. The first game being appropriately titled Adventure. Released all the way back in 1980, Adventure is a classic Atari game that any purist will recommend. After all, this is the grandfather of the genre. But is it still fun? Kind of. Here's what you do. You've got to find the chalice and bring it back to the Golden Castle. Just like every other Atari game, there's different game modes that you can select. Game 1 is the easiest. You can beat it in like less than a minute. Game 2 is more advanced. There's new areas, the bat, but the objective is still the same. Game 3 is just Game 2, but the items are in random locations. Along the way, you'll find keys, a bridge, a magnet, and a spear that will kill the seahorses. Oh, sorry. I meant dragons. They really do look like seahorses, though. Anyway, the dragons are the only enemies in the entire game. And I gotta say, they're a pain in the ass. It's always great when enemies can go through walls, but you can't. In fact, the worst part about this game is when you switch the difficulty to hard, the dragons just run away from you if you have the spear. Even if the spear is on screen, they just run away, which makes sense. But you have to understand, you'll have to carry the spear with you through every single screen. When you have the difficulty switch set to easy, the dragons just walk right into you, even if you have the spear, which honestly is the way to go. Because if they don't die, they will chase you throughout the entire level. In order to kill a dragon, you have to hit him in the chest with the spear, which is easier said than done, because the dragons can come from literally any direction. The spear only faces one direction, which is a pain in the ass. The worst part about this game is when you're near one of the corners of the screen, and a dragon just spawns right behind you and kills you. You don't even have a chance to react to it. It's so easy to get trapped inside these tight corridors where you literally just can't even move. You just have to accept your fate and die. One thing that I find a little funny about this game is whenever you get eaten by a dragon, you can still move around in his stomach. It's a nice little detail that they threw in there. After you do die, just hit game reset. You'll respawn, and the only thing that really sucks is that any dragons that you killed will respawn. All the items that you left on the ground are exactly where they were. Very quickly, let me talk about the bat. He's a douche. I hate him. Why? Because he will steal your items. You'll be trying to go from one side of the map to the other side of the map, and then all of a sudden he'll swoop in and take your item. He doesn't just put it back into their normal spawn areas, he'll put them in random locations. So now you gotta backtrack, which is easily the most annoying part about the game. Not the worst part, but it's always irritating when you're so close to putting the bridge in the right spot, and all of a sudden this bastard just swoops in and steals it. It's a damn shame that you can't kill him. Last thing I want to mention is the Easter egg. This is one of the first video games to ever have an Easter egg, and while it may not seem like something special, there's some history to it. Back in the mid to late 70s, Atari didn't allow programmers to take credit for games that they made. They tried to prevent other companies from stealing their developers. However, this led to many programmers leaving Atari to find work elsewhere. Or they would just make their own companies. A lot of people that left Atari would go on to make another company called Activision. Speaking of Activision, the next game is Pitfall. Created in 1982 by David Crane, Pitfall was a huge game back in the day. If you had an Atari, you had to have Pitfall. It was one of the games to help define the side-scrolling genre. It was also ported to just about every game system. The Intellivision, ColecoVision, Atari 5200, MSX, Commodore 64, and the Apple II all had their own versions of Pitfall. Interesting thing about Pitfall is that it wasn't an arcade game. Usually, if a game was popular in the arcades, it would automatically be a hit on the home consoles. But Pitfall didn't have one, and it became one of the biggest games on the Atari 2600. one of the biggest games of the early 80s. It sold about 4 million units, which was just insane at the time. But that's enough about numbers. Let's talk about gameplay. So, there's 32 pieces of treasure scattered throughout the map. You got 20 minutes to collect them all. You'll be jumping over barrels, swinging on vines, hopping on crocodiles' heads, and if you got some big balls, you can jump over scorpions. God damn it. Man, that guy really sucks. The controls feel just fine. Nothing is restrictive. It's not super hard to play either. You can just pick it up and play, which is one of the best parts about Pitfall. Difficulty's pretty fair as well. You're not gonna die unless you screw up. One thing I love about this game is the sound effects. They're some of the best in gaming. Really, you could use any of these sound effects as like a notification sound on your phone. Now, if you look at the bottom half of the screen, you'll see these tunnels. This is where the game gets a little odd, so I'll do my best to explain it. Basically, if you use these underground tunnels, you'll actually be skipping screens on the top half. So, I think if you head right once down in the tunnels, it counts as 3 screens on the top. If that makes any sense. It's a little hard to explain, but if you use these tunnels, you can find every single piece of treasure. If you just use the top screen, you're not going to find every piece. Really, all I got left to say about Pitfall is, the game just doesn't hold up that well anymore. Honestly, it's pretty boring, which isn't shocking. A lot of Atari 2600 games are boring now. But its sequel, Pitfall 2, holds up tremendously. Pitfall 2: The Lost Caverns was released in 1984 by Activision. And man, this is a really cool game for the 2600. This is easily the most impressive game on the Atari, because this kind of game shouldn't even be possible on the VCS. This is easily the best programming job that Activision ever put out, which is saying a lot, because they were definitely the kings of programming on the 2600. There were 2 major additions to Pitfall. Number 1, the expansion of the world. This game is huge for the Atari, and it also has vertical scrolling, which is a very cool thing to see on the 2600 because this kind of thing wasn't really supposed to be done on an Atari. Another thing you can do is swim in rivers. So now you don't just die instantly as soon as you touch water. And as you can hear, there is also a soundtrack to it. This is pretty remarkable because on the base 2600, there's only 2 channels of sound that the system can put out. So Pitfall 2 has its own proprietary chip that allows for 4 channels of sound rather than just 2. That's why we're able to get the soundtrack, and it also helps improve the visuals a little bit. One cool thing about the music is that it reacts to what the player does. So if you collect a piece of treasure, then the music gets very energetic and very happy sounding. However, if you die, then the music gets very sad and depressing. And I like that. It's really interesting what they were able to do with the music on the Atari. The gameplay for Pitfall 2 is pretty much the same as the original Pitfall. You gotta go around and collect things. However, if you want to beat the game, you have to collect a couple characters and a diamond ring. Then the game ends. One other thing I should note about the gameplay is that if you are killed by something, you don't actually die, you just kind of respawn to one of these red crosses that you run across on the ground. The only thing you lose when you die is points, and depending on how far away you are from a red cross, you could lose a lot, and you could also lose a lot of ground. And that's pretty much it for Pitfall 2. This is easily one of the best games on the Atari. Some of you probably haven't heard about this game, which I can understand because this game was released in 1983 when the video game crash was about to set in. So people were losing interest in game consoles during this time, so it's understandable that some people wouldn't even know about this game. However, if you want to pick it up now, it's cheap, or you can just emulate it for free. In fact, all these games are very easy to find nowadays. because nobody wants these games, but they're still kind of fun to play, I'm not gonna lie. It's fun to look back at the humble beginnings of video games from time to time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.